Hello and welcome to the second video in the third course on investing, where we are digging into investment objectives today. If you missed the first course, make sure to go back and look at that because that'll help demystify some of the process of investing and the choices that we have. And I may use it throughout this course or this video and the videos that follow in order to continue with that demystification process. So make sure to check it out. But today's video, we're really digging into how to invest for ourselves. Like, what do we need to determine for our objectives, so then we can take that information and start making the selection process for investing. As always, this is strictly for educational purposes. When we get into investing, it can become a very personalized thing. And so, this shouldn't be construed for personalized advice. But throughout this, I am going to try and give you some guidance in terms of how you can begin that process so you can narrow down your objectives and what those objectives mean. Before we get started, make sure to follow that newsletter. Again, I'm on YouTube, Thinking Solo, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well under my name. And then, of course, share this course because we're building the community together. We're building financial knowledge together, and this will certainly help. So I appreciate it when you do that. And then let's talk about what we're talking about today. So first, we're going to begin with, like, where do you start? How do you get started in figuring out why you're investing and therefore how to invest? And so we'll talk a little bit about that and also talk about why our why matters. It doesn't. Oftentimes, I think people start investing because they just think, hey, I need a lot of money by the time I'm retiring. But the why matters. And it matters in terms of how we're investing, where we're investing, why we're investing, all that sort of thing. And so talk a little bit about how to figure out that why, but then also what the why results in. Remember that different goals are going to result in different tactics. I'm going to begin the process of helping you understand that today through some examples, but it's not done by today by any means. In another number of videos, I will continue on down that road, so to help you understand how best to invest for whatever sort of goal you have. Then we're going to get into the risk tolerance and risk capability, because that's really going to dictate a little bit of sort of the asset allocation or asset levels that we have. And, I can go deeper into that in another video, but essentially what this video is going to dig into is just sort of what those are and why they matter, and then also why they change. So, what do you want out of investing? And this is not necessarily something that people think about when they first start, but it's a key part of the investment process, because how someone's going to invest when they have 2 years left before they need the money versus how they're going to invest at 30 years is really going to make a big difference in terms of how much risk you should take on, what type of tools you should use, all that sort of thing. And so if we're putting it in that sort of framework of the head, it will determine the skull that we use, the brain that we use, and the neurons that we use and select. And because of that, we really need to understand our why. And so here's some common reasons that people invest. They want to save for retirement. They want to make sure they're protected when they're older and can no longer work. Maybe they want to buy a house. That's a very common reason, especially for younger investors. And so, how do you do that? Education. 529 is a very common tool, for instance. And is that something that you want to do for your own children? Help fund their education. That would be another reason to invest. And then maybe you want to afford children, or help your children out one day, or even potentially invest so you have savings built up for when you have children. That would dictate different solutions and different strategies. And so you need to realize that, because whatever goal you're choosing among there, and there could be far more goals beyond what I just showed right there, that's going to dictate your investing plan, because how we are going to eventually use that money, how we eventually are going to access that money, is going to be dictated by when we need it and why we need it. And so the goal is what we need to figure out first. And in that process, I've developed a little worksheet that you can access, and it will help you determine what goals you have, because you may have multiple goals when it comes to investing. And so this worksheet is really to help determine what those goals are, what those 3, 4, 5 goals are, and then based on that, you can use that worksheet to get to the next step, which is actually picking, the tools and products and whatnot, which we'll get to. So feel free to download that, make a copy for yourself, and fill it out, because it's going to help throughout this series of courses. And so let's say you have 40 years until retirement, and that's the reason you're investing, because you want to save for retirement. You can be a lot more riskier with your investment strategy because you have 40 years to weather ups and downs of the market. Because what people don't realize is the goal is not to outperform the market. The goal is not to beat the market or time the market. Instead, we are trying to gain access to the market. So as economies grow, our money grows faster than inflation. And so if you have 40 years until retirement, if something goes up by 30%, it doesn't really, it's nice. Yeah, we want that. And our net worth has grown, but it doesn't actually impact on a day-to-day because we're not accessing that money. If it drops by 30%, again, it doesn't really impact us on a day-to-day because we don't need to access it for a long time. And in fact, when it drops 30% and we're still buying in, we actually are getting stuff that we would have invested in anyways, just for a lot cheaper. And so it can be actually a very valuable thing when you have that big of time span for the market to fall, because you're just getting stuff cheaper at that point. That's going to differ from someone who's saving for their children's education and they only have 10 years, because there's less time to weather the volatility storms. And there will be volatility. Like, no matter which one you're investing in, there's going to be a little bit of volatility. And so we need to manage that. And so when you're 10 years from paying for your children's college, you may not invest as risky as someone who's 40 years until retirement. And then let's just say you're buying a house in 3 years. Well, that's going to be a far different, because now you are investing money that you truly need very soon, and you cannot risk the loss of the principal. And so that means you're probably going to invest in a lot more conservative products, because you can't suddenly see that drop by 20-30%, because that would be a significant part of the principal that you invested. And so that's why these goals matter, because they are going to dictate how and where you invest. So for instance, and we'll be digging a lot more into this, so this is just a sort of a preview. If you had 40 years until retirement, you can be pretty risky. Maybe you're 90% in equity funds, or 100% even, it's not uncommon. And those would be held within retirement accounts, because you want those to grow tax-free, right? So you're not paying taxes on them on a year-by-year basis. Totally fine, because you don't need them for 40 years. Now, how does that differ from someone who's 10 years away? It's going to be a mix. There's going to be definitely some equity, but definitely some bonds as well. And that's because we want to protect and diversify that protection. And that's really what having a mix of those types of funds would do. And we would likely hold it in, say, a 529 account that is specifically geared from a tax perspective, for parents who want to pay for their children's education. And so you actually get a tax benefit by doing that, and helps you have to save less, because you're not paying as much in taxes when you actually use it. And so that's an important consideration. And then yet that's going to differ a lot from the person who needs it 3 years from now, who wants to buy a house, because we can't see the loss of principal. We only want gains in that situation, because we don't have a lot of time to weather any storms. And so maybe the majority of it is in bonds, or maybe it's just in a high yield savings account. It just depends on the person, the risk tolerance, which I'll get to in a minute. But really, the reason we're doing that is because when we have the need, which is here, versus where your investment is, we don't want the investment to be lower than your need, because that's what we're planning for when we're investing. We want our investments to grow at a certain rate for when we need to access it. It'll be there, and it'll be at the level that we need it to be. And if we've done that, we've achieved our goal, our overarching goal in investing. And if you're not properly coming up with your goal and then allocating towards your goal, what could happen is you have your need, but now the investment does not cover that need, and really want to avoid that. Now, a big part of this is your risk tolerance and your risk capability. Risk tolerance is just your willingness to take on risk. Some people are very willing to take on risk. I have clients who are 90%, 100% in equities because they don't even care that the market falls or anything like that. Maybe they'll be really into crypto, for instance. That's obviously going to be a little riskier, versus someone who's maybe closer to retirement and can't see like the big jumps in their portfolio because they may need it soon. They may be less risk tolerant, or less tolerant of risk. And so when doing so, they are going to be a little more heavy in bonds versus stocks. And that's because they're afraid of those sort of ups and downs. There's not one right answer here. It's just every individual has their own sort of perspective on this. And there's questionnaires that one can take. I'll include a link to one in the video notes so you can try it out yourself, see where you stand. But we need to understand that so we know how much risk you can take on. And then risk capability is just your ability to take on risk. Someone with, $40 million in assets are going to have far greater ability to take on risk than someone who's just beginning to start investing. And it's because they're going to put $5,000 into a crypto coin on the 40 million side, they'll hardly ever notice it if it's gone. Whereas the person investing $5,000 who's just getting started, they would notice that it's gone. And so they have far less ability to just lose everything. And so they have far less ability to take on risk. And we just need to understand that. You need to understand sort of that process. And one way to understand that process is really to evaluate your net worth, which you can in the first video or series of courses on budgeting and financial foundations. So go check that out there if you have any questions on that. And it's also important to remember that these risk tolerance and risk capabilities, they change, and they change with time. And because as we get older, the point where we actually need to access that money becomes shortened. And that means our risk tolerance will likely become greater, and then our will lessen, and our capability becomes less, because now we need to take on less risk because we need that money soon. And so the fact that you may view risk one way now doesn't mean you will view that way down the line. In fact, it should change with you through time, because that means you are adapting your investing to whatever that goal is that you have. And that's it for today. No real action items beyond just going to that sheet and go through it to determine what your investing goals are. And in the next course, we'll make sure to follow that newsletter as well. And then in the next course, what we're going to dig into is your investment options, so you can start learning about what the different investing tools do and how they help you and how they work. I hope to speak to you soon, and let's go.